She walked through the back door every morning, silent and invisible, just the help in a house built on privilege. But when the rich white family she worked for crossed one line too many, they didn't see the storm quietly rising behind her eyes. This is the true-to-life story of a black cleaner who endured their racism, swallowed their cruelty, and then turned their own power against them, one recorded word at a time. What started as a job became a reckoning. And in the end, she didn't just walk away. She rose. Stay with us. You'll want to hear how she did it. In the heart of Oak Glen, a town built on generational wealth and manicured illusions, the Mansfield estate stood like a monument to white affluence: 5 bedrooms, 2 living rooms, a white columned porch, and a silence thick with unspoken rules. It was in this household that Lila James found herself every morning at 7:30 sharp, stepping through the back entrance with a key that opened every door but none of their hearts. Lila was 24, soft-spoken but not silent. Her skin held the deep warmth of roasted chestnuts, and her eyes carried the quiet weariness of someone who'd already seen too much. Cleaning houses wasn't her dream, but it was her job. And she did it well, not because she loved it, but because she had a younger brother to feed and a mother whose joints ached worse in the cold. From the beginning, the Mansfields treated her not as a person, but as a service, like a dishwasher that somehow could smile and nod. "Lila, could you try not to leave water spots on the cutlery again?" Mrs. Mansfield said one morning without looking up from her tablet. "These were flown in from Paris, you know. Real silver." Lila responded with a measured, "Yes, ma'am," swallowing the acid in her throat. She had never seen Paris, but she could clean silver so fine it would mirror the face of her fatigue. The children, Blair and Preston, were old enough to know better but young enough to reflect what they'd absorbed. Blair, 13 and full of haughty innocence, often called Lila the help when talking to her friends on FaceTime. "I can't clean up now," she'd say, brushing her blonde hair in the mirror. "The help's coming tomorrow." Preston, younger but sharper, once asked with disarming bluntness, "Miss Lila, were you poor growing up? Is that why you clean our house?" Lila had smiled politely, but inside, something cracked. Mr. Mansfield, a corporate lawyer with silver-streaked temples and a tone practiced in boardrooms, rarely spoke directly to Lila. When he did, his words dripped with passive command. "You people are hard workers," he once said after returning home early and finding her mopping the marble entryway. "That's what I admire about your kind. So resilient." Lila didn't respond. She kept scrubbing, though the floor had long since been clean. They never called her by her last name, never asked about her life. No one knew, or cared, that she had once been on the honor roll, or that she planned to go back to school for nursing. She wore her silence like armor, deflecting their condescension with the skill of survival. One Monday morning, Lila arrived to find the kitchen littered with crumbs, wine stains on the rug, and a note in Mrs. Mansfield's fine cursive. "Miss James, please be extra thorough today. We hosted important guests over the weekend. Kindly ensure you use bleach on the floors this time. Last time, it didn't quite smell clean enough." Beneath that, a second line in Mr. Mansfield's handwriting. "And don't forget the pool house. The senator's son said it smelled urban last visit." That word, urban, coded in civility, seared through Lila like acid. Her jaw tightened. She stared at the note for a long moment, then folded it neatly and placed it in her apron pocket. The days bled into each other with the same rhythm of disrespect. Lila became background noise in their pristine world, invisible unless something was misplaced or imperfect. A broken vase. Suspicion. A missing spoon. Investigation. Even when Preston lost his own Game Boy, Mrs. Mansfield asked pointedly, "You haven't seen it, have you, Lila? I mean, you're the only one here during the day." But Lila said nothing. Not yet. Because something was brewing behind her quiet demeanor, a reckoning. One built not from rage, but from truth. From years of being underestimated. From the savings she'd been collecting silently. From something the Mansfields could never buy with their wealth, perspective. The turning point was a single, seemingly ordinary day, when Mrs. Mansfield uttered something that would echo far longer than she realized. "Lila," she said, frowning at a freshly folded linen napkin. "You know, if you spoke a little more properly, you could probably work in a nicer place. Something like a boutique, or front desk at a salon. Don't you want better than this?" Lila paused, napkin in hand, and looked her straight in the eye for the first time in months. "I do want better," she said. "And I'm almost there." Mrs. Mansfield blinked, confused, but Lila didn't offer more. Not yet. Because what they didn't know was that beneath Lila's silence was strategy. Beneath their marble floors was a ticking clock. And before long, the house that stood so proudly above her labor would shake beneath the weight of the truth she carried. Lila's words lingered like an open window in the dead of winter, uncomfortable, disruptive, and impossible to ignore. "I do want better. And I'm almost there." It was the first time Mrs. Mansfield had truly heard her speak with intention, and it unsettled her. She watched Lila fold the napkins perfectly into crisp triangles before retreating to the laundry room without another word. Mrs. Mansfield stood still for a moment, then shook her head, muttering to herself, "These people get one compliment and think they're owed the world." In the days that followed, the family's attitude sharpened like knives left out in the cold. "Lila," Mr. Mansfield called from his office, not even bothering to rise from his chair. "You missed a smudge on the glass in the study. It's quite unprofessional." Blair chimed in later that afternoon with teenage cruelty, snapping a photo of Lila cleaning the baseboards and whispering to her friend, "She looks like a character from that slavery movie Dad made me watch." The comment wasn't whispered quietly enough. Lila froze, her hand still on the damp rag, then slowly stood. Blair didn't flinch. She simply smirked and walked away, her phone still recording. That night, Lila sat alone in her small kitchen on the south side of town. The ceiling was low, the paint chipped in places, but it was hers. She pulled out the worn notebook that lived in her purse, flipping to a page marked in red ink. On it, a list: scholarship deadlines, grant applications, tuition estimates. At the bottom, circled 3 times, was a goal: LPN license by spring. But below that, something new. Leverage what they've given. Turn their power against them. It started the next morning. Lila arrived at the Mansfield home earlier than usual. By the time Mrs. Mansfield descended the stairs in her silk robe, the scent of lemon oil already filled the foyer. "Oh," she said, surprised. "You're early." "Yes, ma'am," Lila replied, calm and composed. "Wanted to make sure everything was perfect today." Mrs. Mansfield nodded approvingly, not noticing the tiny black microphone pinned beneath Lila's apron strap. That week, Lila documented everything. Every comment. Every task not in her job description. Every moment Mrs. Mansfield referred to her as "girl." Every time Mr. Mansfield made remarks about her tone. She didn't just record audio. She collected screenshots too, texts from Blair that accidentally landed in the wrong thread, calling Lila "our little pet project," and messages from Preston's tablet that referred to her as the maid from the jungle. Lila was quiet. But not idle. She backed up the files, emailed them to herself, and labeled everything carefully. By the end of the week, she had a small digital archive titled simply, Evidence. Then, one afternoon, the spark. Mr. Mansfield, sipping his usual scotch at 3 p.m., leaned against the kitchen island and glanced up from his phone. "You know, Lila, you're lucky," he said with that paternal condescension that masked the rot underneath. "Not everyone gets to work in a place like this. You've got a front row seat to real success." Lila placed a plate on the counter and looked at him calmly. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "Success." He chuckled. "Of course it is. Look around. You think you'll ever live in a place like this?" Her hand stilled. No, she said, voice low. But one day, I'll own a place where women like me aren't made to feel small for walking through the front door. Mr. Mansfield blinked. But she was already walking away. He didn't know she had caught every word he'd said. Or that this would be the last time she let herself be spoken to like that without consequence. The next part had already begun to take shape. Not vengeance. But something far more powerful. Revelation. And what the Mansfields didn't realize was that their carefully constructed world, polished and perfumed, was about to be held up to the light. It was a Thursday morning, one of those unnervingly quiet ones where the sky stayed the color of raw concrete and everything felt like it was waiting to happen. Lila arrived at the Mansfield house precisely at 7:30, her uniform pressed, her expression unreadable. But she carried something with her this time that couldn't be seen. Resolve. The recordings were saved in multiple places, her cloud drive, a flash drive she kept on her keychain, and a backup email sent to someone she trusted. The texts and screenshots were organized in folders: verbal abuse, racial disparagement, improper conduct. The things that had once made her feel small now sat like ammunition, charged and waiting. But Lila hadn't come to wage war. Not directly. She came to change the game. As she vacuumed the stairs, Blair breezed by in her tennis skirt, phone in hand, laughing with a friend. I told Daddy we should have installed a camera. She could be stealing. The comment was aimed just loud enough to pierce through the white noise hum of the vacuum. Lila paused, turned it off, and looked up. Blair didn't even glance back. That was the moment she decided it was time. That evening, Lila sent an anonymous email. The recipient, the Human Resources Director at Mansfield & Bain, the firm where Mr. Mansfield held senior partnership. Attached were 2 audio files and 1 screenshot. The message was short and exact. Subject: misconduct from a managing partner. Body: recorded within the Mansfield household, during working hours. Transcript included. This behavior is in violation of workplace ethics, even off-premises. More material exists. Signed. A witness tired of silence. She didn't expect a response, not at first. But within 36 hours, a reply came. It was curt but unmistakably shaken. We take these claims seriously. Our ethics compliance team is conducting a preliminary inquiry. Please forward all additional materials at your earliest convenience. She smiled, only slightly. Not with joy. With purpose. The next day at the estate, things felt different. Mr. Mansfield was tense, snapping at his wife over a misprinted email. He didn't greet Lila, nor glance her way. Blair seemed subdued, her eyes flicking to Lila and then away. Only Mrs. Mansfield remained her usual performative self. Lila, she called from the living room. You forgot to fluff the cushions yesterday. The senator's wife is coming by this weekend and I'd rather not have the house looking sloppy. Lila entered with quiet grace, folded a pillow, and then met her employer's gaze. If you'd like to hire someone else, I understand. Mrs. Mansfield blinked. What did you say? I said, if my work is no longer satisfactory, you're welcome to replace me. Mrs. Mansfield hesitated, confused. It was the tone, it wasn't angry, or bitter. It was composed, clear. The kind of tone that unsettles people used to assuming superiority. No need to be dramatic, she finally muttered. Just, do better. Lila nodded, turned, and walked away. But that same evening, she sent the second batch of evidence. This time to a journalist. Elena Rios was no stranger to exposing elite hypocrisy. Her column in the Atlanta Tribune focused on racial disparities in labor and corporate misconduct. Lila had followed her work for years. Subject: story worth telling, hidden labor, hidden abuse. Body: my name is Lila James. I've worked for the Mansfield family of Oak Glen for 2 years. I have documented proof of racist, degrading treatment inside their home. The husband is a partner at Mansfield and Bain. The wife is on the board of the local Women's Empowerment Gala. I've attached audio and written accounts. You said once, the truth is always in the quiet corners. I've lived in those corners long enough. Are you ready to listen? She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay in bed with her eyes open, thinking about her mother's bent fingers and her brother's college fund. About all the times she had bitten her tongue so deeply it bled. 2 days later, Elena responded. This is exactly the kind of story we need. But I want to do this right. Not exploitative. Not just a headline. A reckoning. If you're ready, so am I. Meanwhile, rumors had begun swirling at Mansfield and Bain. Whispers in the break room. A call from the managing director in New York. Mr. Mansfield's emails were suddenly reviewed. Compliance was watching. By the following Monday, Mrs. Mansfield answered the door herself. No smile. No pleasantries. We won't need your services after this week, she said stiffly. We've decided to downsize. Lila met her gaze with that same calm steel. I understand. I'll be gone by Friday. She turned and walked into the house for what would be the final time. But she wasn't leaving in defeat. The war had just moved above ground. Friday arrived cloaked in a stillness that felt almost sacred. Lila stepped into the Mansfield house for the last time, her footsteps quiet against the cold marble, as if the floors themselves were bracing for what was to come. Her final paycheck had been left on the kitchen counter, no thank you, no farewell note. Just a sealed envelope and silence. She took it without pause. Upstairs, the family bustled behind closed doors, unaware of, or refusing to confront, the tremors building just beneath their curated world. Mrs. Mansfield had cancelled the weekend social gathering. Mr. Mansfield hadn't left for work in 2 days. And Blair had posted nothing on social media since Wednesday, unheard of. By noon, Lila had completed her duties. The floors shined. The sheets were pressed. The air smelled of lemon and finality. Then she walked into the study, placed her apron on the desk, and left behind a second envelope. Inside, a printed transcript of Mr. Mansfield's recorded comments. The one where he had said, with whiskey on his breath and arrogance in his tone, "You people are hard workers. That's what I admire about your kind." There was no signature. Just the words at the bottom. Respect is not owed to the wealthy. It's owed to the human. Lila closed the door behind her. 3 days later, the Atlanta Tribune released the feature. Invisible Hands, a cleaner's account of racism in the home of power. The article pulled no punches. It chronicled the systemic degradation domestic workers often faced behind the gated facades of wealth. Lila's voice, quoted directly, cut through the page with calm fury. They smiled at me while stepping over me. Their children mocked me with the same ease they ordered lunch. I wasn't a person to them. I was a fixture, like the lamp or the marble. But the difference is, I remember. The piece went viral. Within hours, the Mansfield name trended on social media, but not for its prestige. Corporate sponsors for Mrs. Mansfield's women's charity began pulling out. Mr. Mansfield was placed on indefinite leave. Investigations at the firm multiplied. But Lila didn't watch it unfold from the sidelines. She sat in the admissions office of a local college, an acceptance letter in hand. She had enrolled in the spring nursing program. When asked for her occupation on the enrollment form, she paused. Then wrote. Student. Advocate. Survivor. Because for the first time, she was writing her own story. Spring came early to Oak Glen that year. The air smelled like new beginnings, wet soil, cut grass, rain-washed skies. Lila James stood outside the college campus building, a canvas tote slung over her shoulder, a textbook tucked beneath her arm, and sunlight warming the crown of her head. She had just come from her clinical foundations class, and her notes were full of scribbled hearts, diagrams, and margin questions about the circulatory system. It had been 3 months since she last stepped through the Mansfield estate. 3 months since she had been let go, and walked out with nothing but her dignity, a folder of proof, and a quiet, righteous fire in her belly. Now, her days no longer began at 7:30 with bleach and silence. They began with lectures, study groups, library hours, and a planner scribbled with scholarship deadlines. Her nights were no longer filled with aching wrists and unwiped tears. They were filled with ambition, and the steady hum of hope. The fallout from the Atlanta Tribune article had been swifter and more resounding than she ever imagined. Mr. Mansfield had been quietly asked to resign from his firm. The managing board issued a vague statement about rebuilding trust, but the silence from their website's leadership page spoke louder. Mrs. Mansfield's chair on the Women's Empowerment Gala had been restructured, her image removed from promotional materials after donors voiced their disapproval. But Lila hadn't gloated. That wasn't the kind of victory she craved. What satisfied her was the ripple effect. One by one, other domestic workers, black, brown, immigrant, had begun speaking up. A Facebook group started by one of them gained traction. Someone launched a podcast. And one morning, a young woman from across town messaged Lila, "Your story helped me quit a house where I was being treated like a ghost. Thank you." That was worth more than any retribution. On a sunny Friday, her brother Malik met her outside campus, fresh from his job at the rec center. He had a chocolate milkshake in one hand and his hoodie half-zipped. "Guess who passed his GED test?" he grinned. Lila beamed, pulling him into a hug. "I knew you would." They walked through the quad, laughter between them like music. The pain they'd carried for years was still there, but it no longer led the way. It had become a scar, not a wound. Something that proved they had endured. A few weeks later, Lila was invited to speak on a local radio show about labor rights and racial dignity. At first, she hesitated. But something inside her, maybe the ghost of every girl who'd been told to be small, said, "Say yes." And so she did. She sat in the studio, a pair of headphones over her ears, her voice steady in the mic. "When I was cleaning that house," she said softly, "I used to wonder if anyone would ever see me. Not just glance, but see me. And now, I've learned I never needed their eyes. I just needed my own voice." The host nodded, visibly moved. The phone lines lit up. One caller cried. Another simply said, "Thank you for telling the truth." Later that year, the college awarded her a modest but meaningful community scholarship, funded by donations inspired by her story. Elena Rios, the journalist who wrote the piece that started it all, attended the ceremony. They hugged afterward like old friends. "I told you," Elena whispered. "You didn't just tell a story. You started something." As summer approached, Lila stood one evening on the porch of her mother's modest but freshly painted home, watching the fireflies dance in the dusk. Her mother, now retired and walking with more ease thanks to her physical therapy, came out with 2 mugs of tea. "You still think about them?" she asked gently. Lila nodded. "Sometimes. Not with anger, though. Just, as a reminder." Her mother smiled. "Then they served a purpose, baby." That night, Lila opened her notebook, the same one she'd carried to the Mansfield house every day. Most of the pages had been filled now. Some with plans, some with dreams. Some with lines she had once written in the dark to remind herself she was still here. On the last page, she wrote something new. "I entered their house as someone they barely saw. I left it as someone the world would hear. And more importantly, I saw myself." The next morning, she rose early, not to clean, but to care. She slipped into scrubs the color of sky and walked into the hospital for her first clinical rotation. Her name badge read, "Lila James, student nurse." And this time, every room she entered, she walked through the front door. Because finally, she was where she belonged. And that's how Lila James turned quiet labor into loud justice. She didn't just walk away from the pain, she walked into her purpose. If you believe in standing up even when the world tries to keep you down, give this video a thumbs up. Comment, "I see you, Lila," if her courage inspired you, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter. Because someone out there needs this reminder, you are never powerless.